Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
First of all, this afternoon, in the last hour or so, Theresa May has concluded a deal with the Democratic Unionist Party on a so-called confidence and supply agreement, in which the Northern Irish Party will support the government on key votes. The Prime Minister needs the party's MPs after failing to win an overall majority at the general election. Let's hear what DUP leader Arlene Foster had to say earlier in Downing Street.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament. This agreement will operate to deliver a stable government in the United Kingdom's national interest at this vital time. Throughout these discussions, our guiding principle has been our commitment to acting in the national interest in accordance with our shared objectives for strengthening and enhancing our precious union. In concluding this wide-ranging agreement, we have done so on the basis of advancing the security of our nation, building prosperity for all, and supporting an exit from the European Union that benefits all parts of the United Kingdom. The details of our agreement and future working arrangements will be published in full.
Arlene Foster there. Well, we can speak now to our Northern Ireland political editor, Mark Devonport, who's also in Downing Street. Well, it took a while, didn't it, Mark Devonport? But today we finally have this deal.
Obviously, there was some haggling that went on behind the scenes. Whatever the government's initial offer was, the DUP was looking for more, and probably, as in all these haggling sessions, they've ended up somewhere in the middle. The DUP, I think, will feel that they've done a good deal in terms of getting £1 billion of extra money and flexibility over the use of £500 million from a previous agreement in which the Treasury rules had actually made it rather difficult to spend that money. At the same time, I don't think they necessarily got everything they were seeking in terms of changing tax rates in Northern Ireland. They've only got a commitment to secure reports on matters like air passenger duty or VAT on tourism in Northern Ireland.
Right, but they have, of course, now provided what the government needed, and that is a workable majority on those key votes.
Absolutely, and what they are offering is to essentially keep Theresa May's government in business. They will support it in relation to the budget, in relation to votes of confidence, in relation to any vote which is related to the UK's exit from the European Union, because of course they were Brexiteers during the referendum campaign, and also in relation to any legislation brought forward as regards national security. In terms of other matters, they have withheld the right to vote according to whatever they decide as the Parliament comes up.
Yes, we're just looking at pictures of the documents being signed. Jeffrey Donaldson there for the DUP, Gavin Williamson there for the Conservatives, shaking hands on that deal. The Prime Minister not looking entirely comfortable, I have to say, standing there when you look at the choreography. The DUP have, to some extent, extracted a high price, haven't they?
Yes, well, I think they had always promised that if they did hold the balance of power in a hung Parliament, they would look to gain influence and extra resources for Northern Ireland, and that's exactly what they've done. The big question now will be what will the impact of this be on the situation back at Stormont, where the power-sharing executive doesn't exist. Will this largesse from Westminster be enough to persuade Sinn Féin that they ought to get into a power-sharing executive again with the DUP, or will they see this as quite separate or insufficient?
Well, there have already been, of course, accusations that the government will no longer be an honest broker in trying to restore that power-sharing arrangement. But Arlene Foster was at pains, I thought, when she gave her statement close to where you're standing, to say that the money that they have got from the government will be for all people in Northern Ireland. It'll be to benefit everyone in Northern Ireland, obviously signalling very strongly there to the nationalist community that this is for everybody.
Yes, I mean, there are elements in this which undoubtedly will be welcomed by many people in Northern Ireland. For instance, there's a big bottleneck in Belfast, the York Street interchange, and there's been a long delay to work that would sort that out. I would imagine Nationalists and Unionists will be quite happy if they're going more smoothly through that interchange. Nationalists and Unionists will be quite happy if they get better super-fast broadband, which is another element of this package. There's not a lot of politics in the deal that I've seen so far, although there is a reference to the new legacy institutions which are due to be created in order to tackle the history of the Troubles. And that reference is that the Conservatives and the DUP don't want those bodies to in any unfair way pursue military veterans and former members of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. So that's the two parties probably saying something that Sinn Féin would have doubts about, but so far that's the only element I can see that might be partisan in relation to this deal.
And just finally then, also on policy commitments, there's been some talk that the triple lock for pensioners will now be retained. It was a manifesto commitment by the Conservatives, but because of the result, there was already discussion that that might not stay, and also winter fuel payments for all pensioners. Have you heard that both of those things now will remain?
Yes, that was spelled out by Arlene Foster in her comments to us just a few moments ago here in Downing Street. She says that the triple lock will stay. There'll be no means testing of the winter fuel allowance. And it's interesting that both those specific commitments were made by the DUP in their manifesto, that they would oppose both of those. So,
but is that for Northern Ireland or the whole of the UK, as you understand it?
Well, as far as I understand it, I'm just having a quick look here. She says that there will be no change across. Yes, I've just double-checked that. No change across the United Kingdom. So what they are saying is they're unionists. They believe in the United Kingdom, and they have looked for things in relation to the whole of the United Kingdom, and that they have stuck by their manifesto. And obviously, the difference, I suppose, between a confidence and supply deal and a formal coalition is that they've had the benefit of being able to stick to some of the things that they said in their manifesto and not necessarily trade things away. So that's something where they will claim an achievement, not just in Northern Ireland, but across the UK.
Mark Devonport, thank you very much. Well, we're joined now from Belfast by the former Democratic Unionist Party Assembly member, Alistair Ross. Alistair Ross, your reaction to the deal that's been announced today?
Well, I think it's a good deal for Northern Ireland, and the DUP have been very clear in saying that when they entered these discussions it would be for the benefit of Northern Ireland. So £1 billion for Northern Ireland in terms of infrastructure projects, in terms of broadband, I think that's positive. More money for health and education, I think that's clearly positive. But I also think that the DUP will be quite pleased that they've been able to influence wider government policy. So around the two issues you've been talking about, the triple lock for pensions, the winter fuel allowance, winter fuel payments, also in terms of defence spending, and of course in the fact that they're allowing a government to be formed and giving it an element of stability. I think one of the most important things from a Northern Ireland point of view is that those commitments to spending are within the first 2 years. So any concern there would have been that this Parliament won't last 5 years, I think that has been helped by the DUP in making sure that those big economic commitments are made within the first 2 years of the Parliament.
Right, Stephen Crabb. So you've got the DUP to thank for getting this government back on its tracks, if you like, now has a workable majority. Did you ever think you'd see yourself in this position where you had to rely on Ulster Unionists for working in government?
Well, it's not the outcome that any of us wanted when we embarked on the election campaign 9 weeks ago. But the electorate have given their verdict. They've delivered a hung parliament, they've cast their votes, and this is the parliament that we've got. And if you look at countries all across Europe, which are far more used to doing coalition deals, this kind of thing happens very, very regularly. It's perhaps not, we're not used to it in Britain, but actually it is a cost of doing business. We need a government with a functioning majority in the House of Commons. My party doesn't have that majority, so we do a deal with a minor party. The Liberal Democrats didn't want to discuss a coalition. Plaid Cymru didn't, so we are doing a deal with the Ulster Unionists. Right,
you didn't have to, of course. You could have run the country as a minority government. You wouldn't have had to have paid £1 billion, which many people will say is too high a price to pay for the support of the Democratic Unionists.
Well, let's see what this Parliament achieves. If it actually provides a measure of stability to allow us as a government to do things other than just delivering on Brexit, which of course is really, really important, but if it gives us the opportunity of passing legislation to renew our infrastructure, to develop and improve our skills and education policies, then we'll all be looking back saying, actually, that was a deal well worth it for the taxpayer and for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Although there's every indication that actually it'll be a slimmed-down legislative programme, because it will be hard to get stuff through like the sort of bills you've outlined. You must be very pleased, though, Margaret Hodge, because, of course, the DUP has managed to extract from the government a commitment to keeping winter fuel payments for pensioners and the triple lock, both of which were in the Labour manifesto.
I think another thing that Theresa May did was she underestimated the skill of the DUP. They're very skilled negotiators, very practiced at it. She announced that she'd got a deal within, I can't remember, 24, 48 hours, and it's taken her much longer than it took to reach the deal with the Liberal Democrats. So that's the first thing. And yes, I'm pleased that we've got back the rights for pensioners. But I'd say the two things. One, £1 billion to Northern Ireland. What's that going to do to Scotland, to North East England, to Wales and places like that? And the other thing I'd say, you said something there which rather caught my ear, which was the deal around that was done around the agreement. So the, you know, and the implications for there. So is this going to be self-contained? Are we going to see steps starting which will undermine the Northern Ireland Agreement? And remember what Chris Patten said yesterday? He said this is the beginnings of a nasty party back into the Tory party.
Well, Alistair Ross, let's pick up on the power sharing agreement, because there have been reports, I don't think it's been confirmed, that the £1 billion would in some way be conditional on restoring that power sharing executive. What have you heard?
Well, no, I don't think that it is. There's nothing in the agreement that it's... what it certainly will do is provide incentive. If you have a Northern Ireland executive with additional money, it would be in the interest of all the political parties in Northern Ireland to have a say in how that is spent. If Sinn Féin aren't willing to get back into government in Northern Ireland, then they don't have any say in where that money is spent. And of course, when you look at the types of figures that may be talked about in infrastructure projects, the York Street Exchange project will not cost all of the money that's being earmarked for investment for infrastructure projects. So there's other money that could be spent in other places in Northern Ireland.
Sure, but
and I would have thought Sinn Féin would want to have some influence on where that money is spent.
Yes,
and the only way they can do that is getting back into government here.
Except they don't want to see Arlene Foster, of course, as the First Minister. And Arlene Foster compared Sinn Féin during the election to a crocodile that keeps coming back and asking for more. Do you think that will help bring the two sides together?
Look, I think politicians in Northern Ireland, there are many issues that divide them, but the one thing that should unite them is trying to make improvements for the economy, getting more investment here, securing jobs here, getting more money to tackle the waiting list in the health system, getting more money to tackle educational underachievement. And I think, look, when it comes down to it, when it comes to the last 24 hours of negotiations here to get devolution back up and running again, those are the most significant and most important aspects of any deal.
The other question I had, and you've read it to us, so I haven't had time to absorb it, is that the money is to be spent within 2 years?
Yes, it is over 2 years.
So does that mean that we're going to have a general election at the end of 2 years? Is that when the agreement comes to an end?
Of course it doesn't mean that.
Well, it might.
But does it mean more money?
Well, it means that there's every incentive for the politicians in Northern Ireland to get back to Stormont and work out how strategically to spend the money. So that's a positive.
No, what I meant is in 2 years they'll be asking for more money from the government here.
Well, let's see what happens.
That sounds like to me like even if the Theresa May government lasts over this coming period, it won't last more than 2 years.
All right, let's leave it there because we're going to talk to Damien Green, the First Secretary of State, later on in the programme. But Alistair Ross, for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, let's get back to our top story today. That's the deal that's been concluded in the last hour or so with the Democratic Unionist Party. Let's hear what the former Northern Ireland Secretary, Theresa Villiers, had to say.
I believe that this agreement is, I think it's welcome. It will give an important degree of stability in relation to the UK government. I believe that there's nothing in it which would, make it difficult for the Stormont institutions to be re-established. I'm sure that James Brockenshire, the Secretary of State, and his team will continue to work really hard with the Northern Ireland parties to get the devolved institutions up and running again.
Well, we're joined now by the First Secretary of State, Damien Green, as billed. So you must be hugely relieved. Finally, you've got the DUP on board for a workable majority.
Well, I'm very pleased. It makes two things happen. First of all, people can be more confident now that the government will be able to get its legislative programme through, because the deal covers Brexit legislation, financial legislation like budgets, national security legislation and, of course, the Queen's speech. But also, the deal means that the support we're giving to Northern Ireland, I hope and expect, will make it easier to conclude a deal that allows the parties to get back to proper democratic devolved government, which we all want to see in Northern Ireland.
Right, well, before we get to the power sharing, let's talk about the deal itself and the amount of money that you had to give the DUP in order for them to agree to a confidence and supply arrangement. £1 billion is a lot of money. That's a high price that they've extracted from your government.
It's the sort of money that's been used before to try and push the peace process and the devolution process forward. In 2014, when the Stormont Agreement was signed, actually there was a package of £2 billion. And we all know that Northern Ireland has particular needs and problems because of its history. Particularly, a lot of this money is infrastructure spending.
Yes.
And for 30 years, because of the Troubles, infrastructure spending in Northern Ireland was heavily and rightly devoted to security and policing and so on. So there are other areas where they are deficient.
So if it was such a reasonable thing to do, why did it take you so long? I mean, it's taken an awful lot longer than the coalition agreement between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, which took 5 days. This has taken far longer.
Well, we've been working to the time that's required to strike the deal. It's obviously the most important deadline.
It was difficult, wasn't it? It was difficult to agree.
Well, I mean, all agreements take time to negotiate.
5 days, as I say, for the Rose Garden for Nick Clegg and David Cameron to stand there.
We wanted to do it specifically in time for this Thursday's deadline on the devolution agreement. That's the key deadline this week in Northern Ireland.
Well, is that the key deadline? The key deadline was in order to get the Queen's speech, obviously, through through Parliament and the House of Commons. I mean, there are some people in your party, Damien Green, suggested there was no need to strike a deal with the DUP at all. They'd never vote to bring down the government and risk, in their mind, Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street. So why do it?
Well, there are two aspects to the deal. There's the confidence and supply deal, which does give confidence to people, as I say, to know that our legislative programme will be able to get through. But there's also the extra support, the financial deal. And as I say, I think that will be really helpful because that money can be spent by the Northern Ireland executive. It's not spent by the DUP. It's spent by an executive which has to be cross-party.
You would have given any amount of money because otherwise you would not have been able to have a working majority, as you said, in order to push your legislative programme through. I mean, you can spend all the time you like saying how good it is for Northern Ireland. Yes, I mean, they'll agree to that. That's why they've signed this deal. We saw the pictures there. But this was about you paying any price because you need the support of the Democratic Unionists.
Well, but we haven't paid any price. We've deliberately decided to support in specific ways for specific projects, helping people who've got mental health problems. Obviously, again, post the Troubles, that's a particular issue in Northern Ireland. Just as we've said, we will spend more money on mental health throughout this country. We want more city deals, as we have in other parts of the United Kingdom.
And are you also pleased and grateful to the DUP, in fact, for their, I suppose, stance and position in these negotiations to drop cutting winter fuel payments for some pensioners and maintaining the triple lock for pensioners?
Well, we saw what happened at the election, and the Prime Minister has said subsequently, OK, we will listen to what people maybe didn't want to hear from us at the election, and those are two examples where pretty clearly people didn't want that. So we've been flexible about that. We've listened.
How much will it cost to keep winter fuel payments for all pensioners over the next few years?
Well, we don't know what the extra cost is. I mean, it costs about £2 billion a year. And because we were going to consult on the level at which we would start means testing, there isn't a sort of baseline figure you can work from. So that there's no hard and fast cost because it wasn't going to happen this winter anyway, because it would have been too late to have run the consultation.
Right, you don't need to save that money anymore then?
Well, we need to keep saving money. We need to keep bringing the deficit down. But that's
not going to help, is it? Because that is going to be an extra cost.
As I say, people spoke at one of the advantages and occasionally disadvantages of democracy. People get their chance to say, we have to listen to what people say at elections, as we do in referenda, and that's what we're doing.
Right, so austerity's gone, hasn't it?
Well, no, I mean, the idea that suddenly we can, have unlimited money everywhere for everything is not true. What is true is that if you have a consistently strong economy, which we've had for a number of years now, you can afford to spend more money.
People will look at rising inflation, people will look at the falling pound, people will say that actually is the economy as good and as strong as you say if wages aren't keeping up with prices and the cost of living has gone up, and yet you can spend we don't yet know, of course, extra money, an unspecified amount, on keeping winter fuel payments for wealthy pensioners?
Well, we can spend extra money because the underlying growth rate of the economy is strong enough to enable us to do so. And we were saying that long before this agreement. At the election, we pointed out that we had in our spending plans an extra £8 billion for health spending, an extra £4 billion for education.
But if the economy was so strong, why did you want to make these cuts during the election campaign? Why was it that you felt it would be a good idea to continue with austerity in this regard, regarding a triple lock going to a double lock, cutting winter fuel payments, if we have such a strong economy?
Well, because all of government is a balance. You have to decide how much money you can afford to spend without loading borrowing on future generations or taxation on current generations. And you strike that balance, but at the same time, you want to spend as much as you can on the vital public services and on parts of the country that haven't shared in the general rise in prosperity. That's what government is. It's a collection of making those choices.
Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, used the expression the magic money tree when describing Labour's policies, and she may feel that's what it was. But the Tories have now got their very own magic money tree, because you are now loading future generations. If we use the bar and the measure you set during the election campaign to bring down costs, to try and further reduce the deficit, to try and make an impact on overall debt, you're doing the exact opposite.
No, we have a clear commitment to eliminate the deficit by the middle years of the next decade. That was what we went into the election with. The announcement today makes no difference to that. That's still our target, and under all the projections of various economists, that can still be met. So we're still aiming at that target.
Jo, can I come in? Because that just feels to me so it's not true, and I think
which bit's not true?
That we're going to be able to cut the deficit without absolutely really devastating cuts. First of all, the economy is not growing as fast as it was. That's the first quarter of this year as compared to last year. Secondly, inflation is rolling out. Thirdly, you've got the pressures on things like, because of inflation, public sector pay, benefit levels.
So you're advocating more spending, as the Labour manifesto said?
I would certainly, if it were me, I would advocate not making cutting the deficit your priority and protecting public.
But they're not. They're pushing me to deficit. One at a time.
They're not. So that's why I say this is not an honest, open conversation. And if it was honest and open, you'd say we've got all these problems. We're going to put cutting the deficit on the back burner.
Well, Damien Green.
Well, we are bringing the deficit. We get criticised for not cutting the deficit faster in some quarters. George Osborne was in 2010, but we have chosen.
But he didn't cut it anywhere left as fast as he said he was going to.
Well, but what we've done is we've cut 2/3 of the deficit over the past 7 years, 100 billion off the deficit, and we've said we're going to take a gradual reduction in the deficit, which is the responsible way to do it.
Isn't that putting then austerity actually slightly to the back burner here, which is what you want?
No, well, I'm not quarrelling with putting austerity, putting the deficit on the back burner. I think that's what I'm quarrelling with is that there ought to be openness and honesty in these discussions on these programmes for the British people about the state of the public services, the state of the public finances, and the ability to cut it.
You just stood on an election manifesto that committed to tens of billions of extra spending with no sign whatsoever.
I'm not the government, actually, Damien.
Right, hang on.
But you are the opposition.
Right. Can I just come back to Damien Green on the power sharing issue, because you mentioned that obviously at the beginning. How confident are you now, as a result of this deal and Arlene Foster's words that this would be for all people in Northern Ireland, that we will have a power sharing executive back in Stormont?
I'm hopeful, because this is a good deal for the whole of Northern Ireland. We all know the history there, and I'm not part of the talks over there, so I don't know in detail what's happening with the talks there. But certainly this deal, specifically because the money is there to be spent by the Northern Ireland Executive, then everyone from all political persuasions in Northern Ireland can benefit from this deal, and a Northern Ireland Executive can decide how best to spend this money to support Northern Ireland's infrastructure across the area. So this, I hope, will make a positive contribution to making sure we do get a new devolution deal, a new devolved executive in Northern Ireland.
Damien Green, First Secretary of State, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. I've been getting